Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back. We are ready to take a closer look at the kidney. And so here we're looking at a sagittal cut of a kidney. And what we can see is the outer layer of the kidney we're going to refer to as the cortex. And we've seen this kind of terminology before where we're using the word cortex to refer to the outermost layer. This word literally can be translated to like bark. So we're seeing it in terms of this outer layer of the organ. And then we have the innermost layer, which we can refer to as the medulla. And again, we've had this same kind of terminology in the past. Now, as we look at the medulla, or we can call it the renal medulla, meaning the inside of the kidney, we'll see that we can identify sort of these triangular shaped structures inside the medulla. And we talk about each one of these as a pyramid or renal pyramid. And what we'll see then is that the medulla can have anywhere from 6 to 18 pyramids that compose it. So the pyramid is like a structure of the medulla itself. When we look at the kidney, we see there's quite a lot of blood vessels, and you're going to be naming all of these different blood vessels as part of your lab work. So I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that here for you in the lecture, but we can see entering the kidney your renal artery, and then we can see exiting the kidney the renal vein. And we see then those blood vessels, basically penetrating all the way through the medulla and up into the cortex. Taking a look at this single pyramid here, we can see we have a lot of these. They look like little yellow ball-like structures. And then coming off of a couple of these yellow balls, we're seeing these thin little white tubes. And these thin little white tubes are called nephrons. And we're going to be looking at this nephron in a whole lot of detail in just a little bit of time. We'll see this is actually the smallest functional unit of the kidney, and so we'll become very familiar with the nephron. Several nephrons are going to empty together into a single tube called the collecting duct. And then we'll see several collecting ducts are going to empty into what's called the papillary duct. So our tubing is getting progressively larger and larger and larger. And also we're seeing like multiple nephrons feed into collecting duct, multiple collecting ducts feed into the papillary duct. From the papillary duct, we're going to enter into what's called a minor calyx. And we'll see that the minor calyx is basically at the end of the pyramid. So if the pyramid is the point of the pyramid is pointing down into that minor calyx, then we will see several of these minor calyxes feed together to a single major calyx. And we're seeing several of those major calyxes will feed together into what's called the renal pelvis. And the renal pelvis then becomes continuous with the ureter, which we already talked about in our previous video. So if we did this again, we'll see that the fluid is produced in the nephron, feeding into collecting ducts. It's actually at the collecting duct that we're going to be calling this fluid urine. The urine then flows into the papillary duct. From the papillary duct, we see the fluid going into the minor calyx. Several minor calyxes together feed into the major calyx. Major calyxes together feed into the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis then becomes continuous with the ureter. Now we've seen, of course, that your kidneys are paired, left and right kidney, and the ureters are then paired, left and right ureter. And then both of those ureters feed into the urinary bladder. So we have one bladder that's storing the urine. And then we see that the urine will exit the body through the opening called the urethra, which we did see a difference in male body type and female body type. If we take a look at one of those renal pyramids in more detail, that's what this image would be here. So we're still looking basically at a sagittal cut of the kidney. We're looking at the same model from our lab, but in this case, we have a blown up, a blown up picture of actually not what's called the renal pyramid, but what is called the renal lobe. So we're looking here at the whole renal lobe. And the renal lobe includes part of the renal cortex, and it's including one renal pyramid, which is, remember, making several of these are making up that renal medulla. Now here again, we're seeing extensive vascularization, and you'll be labeling all of these as part of your lab work, and I'm not going to take time to do that with y'all in lecture, except I do want to name out the paratubular capillaries that we can see up here in the cortex. This would be surrounding those nephrons, which have been omitted from this part of the diagram. And then we also see blood vessels extending down into the pyramid. So we're seeing that the tubing, the nephron, and the collecting duct are completely surrounded by blood vessels. So it's super important. We're also seeing these sort of like yellowish balls that we had in that earlier diagram, and now we're able to see inside. And we can see here that inside one of those tubes, we have blood capillary, and we're going to call that blood capillary glomerulus. So that's the actual blood vessel here. And then we're going to see that that blood vessel is surrounded by nephron. And so the nephron kind of begins with this little globe-shaped, ball-shaped structure capsule. And then we see it twist and turn, twist and turn. It dips down from the cortex into the medulla. It dips back up from the medulla into the cortex, and then it continues to twist and turn, twist and turn, twist and turn until it empties into the collecting duct. And so we're going to be going into super detailed description of this structure, but right now we can just go ahead and label it as our nephron. And then remember, this tube that it empties into is called the collecting duct. Now, when we talk about the nephron, we will see that you can have a cortical nephron, which would be located, you guessed it, in the cortex. And then you can also have one that's extending further down into the medullary cavity, and we call that a juxtamedullary nephron, where my personal definition of juxta is like close to. So juxtamedullary is like close to the medulla. So juxtamedullary nephron is going to have some portion in the cortex, but then also, dipping down further into that medullary space. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, meaning that this is actually the location where the kidney is making the urine. And then we'll see that there are about 1.3 million located in each kidney. And remember, we have two kidneys. Those of us who are lucky have two kidneys, two functional kidneys. So we have, twice as many nephrons for our body. And when we talk about it making urine, we can also talk about that as regulating fluid and electrolyte, regulates fluid and electrolyte balance. And then we can also talk about the nephron as being where we're removing toxins. And so up next, what we're going to be doing is looking up close and personal at each section of the nephron, talking about its detailed anatomy and physiology. Just where we're here, I think let's go ahead and mention it's mostly made out of simple cuboidal epithelium, but there'll be some places where we'll get simple squamous epithelium. All right, that's it for this video. Stay tuned. Up next, we're going to look at that ball, that little capsule. As always, take care of yourselves and each other.